¿Qué tal, mi gente bonita de YouTube? ¿Qué tal, bandita? Buenos días, buenas tardes y buenas noches, dependiendo a qué hora estén viendo el video. ¿Cómo se encuentran? Yo, excelente, porque el día de hoy vamos a cambiar las piezas metálicas, algunas piezas metálicas de la Mn300, Tank 300 o como me gusta decirle, tanque. Vamos a cambiar los diferenciales, los ejes cardanes y los soportes de los diferenciales. Quiero apuntar 2 puntos sobre los soportes de los diferenciales. No es necesario cambiarlos si ustedes van a hacer puro crawling o la van a tratar con cariño. Si la van a tratar con cariño, no es necesario cambiarlos, pero a mí me gustaría tratarla un poquito más agresivo, correrla y golpearla y hacer cosas. De por sí ya la he tratado un poquito mal, pero pues como no es muy rápida, la verdad es que pues ha aguantado bastante bien. Pero como quiero ponerle el brushless, va a ser mucho más rápida. Entonces necesito que vaya a soportar el abuso que le voy a dar. Por eso es que vamos a cambiar los soportes de diferenciales. ¿Por qué? Porque los de plástico son bastante buenos, pero si llegas a dar un salto muy grande o a golpear una piedra a muy alta velocidad, se rompen y el amortiguador queda colgando. Se puede reparar y sí, pero a veces llegan a fracturarse de esta parte de aquí, cosa que ya me pasó a mí en la Mn78. Estaba jugando con ella, con una batería 3S, iba muy rápido, salté una manguera y a la hora de caer el soporte se rompió. Entonces, para evitar que pase eso de una vez en esta, vamos a cambiar los soportes. El único detalle que hay es que los amortiguadores que ya le puse a la Mn300, el orificio de la rótula inferior es de 2 milímetros. Entonces, estos son de 2.5. No vamos a poder pasar el tornillo de 2.5 a través de la rótula de 2. Por lo que voy a cambiar las rótulas de los amortiguadores por estas rótulas de 2.5. Podría cambiar los amortiguadores, pero la verdad es que no tengo otros amortiguadores de 59 milímetros. Estos los quité de unos amortiguadores de 53. Ok, no le pongo esos de 53 porque quiero conservar la altura de la camioneta, porque quizá en un futuro ponga unas llantas un poco más grandes. La verdad es que me gusta cómo se ve con estas, pero tal vez unas llantas más grandes se vería un poquillo más agresiva, y eso es lo que intento hacer con ella. Entonces, amigos, espero les guste este video. Si tienen algún consejo o algún comentario que decir, pónganme en los comentarios. Nos quedamos en compañía de el queridísimo Alan Watts. Ya saben que me encanta escuchar a Alan Watts mientras desarmo y armo mis carritos. Es bastante relajante. Espero lo disfruten y vamos a darle. Vamos a ver qué show.
You know, there's something rather exhausting that happens to most people every single morning. They open their eyes, and before their feet even touch the floor, the war has already begun. Not a war with the world outside, not a conflict with another person, but a battle so intimate, so relentless, that many people don't even realize they're fighting. It's the war inside your own skull. And here's what's peculiar about this war. We've been told it's normal. We've been told it's simply what it means to be human. The struggle between what you want to do and what you should do, between the part of you that craves rest and the part that demands productivity, between who you are and who you think you're supposed to be. But I want to suggest something quite different to you today. That this war, this endless internal combat, is not a sign that something is wrong with you. It's a sign that you fundamentally misunderstood something about reality itself. And once you see what that misunderstanding is, once you truly grasp it, the war doesn't end because one side finally wins. It ends because you realize there were never two sides to begin with. Now, let me ask you something. When you wake up in the morning and feel that familiar resistance, that heavy reluctance to face the day, what do you call it? Most people have a word ready. They call it laziness. They call it lack of discipline. They call it anxiety or depression or weakness of character. And notice what happens when you apply these labels. You've just declared war. You've taken something that was simply arising in you, a feeling, an energy, a natural movement of your being, and you've made it into an enemy, something to be conquered, something to be eliminated, something to be ashamed of. And so the battle begins. The disciplined part of you attacks the tired part. The ambitious part wages war against the part that simply wants to breathe. The idealized version of yourself stands in judgment over the actual, living, breathing human being that you are. This is exhausting beyond measure, not because the work itself is hard, but because you're spending most of your energy fighting yourself before you even begin to work. Think about it this way. Imagine trying to run a race while simultaneously punching yourself in the stomach. You might still finish. You might even win. But at what cost? And more importantly, why would anyone design a race this way? Yet this is precisely how most people live their entire lives. The tragedy isn't that you feel resistance or doubt or fear. The tragedy is that you've been taught to treat these feelings as evidence of your inadequacy rather than as natural rhythms of a living organism. Here's where it gets interesting. The human mind has a remarkable faculty. It can divide. It can categorize. It can separate the world into neat little compartments, hot and cold, light and dark, up and down, friend and enemy. This ability is extraordinarily useful. It's how your ancestors survived. When a tiger appeared in the jungle, the mind needed to instantly categorize danger or not danger, stay or run, fight or flee. This binary thinking kept them alive. But somewhere along the way, something strange happened. The mind, so skilled at dividing the external world for purposes of survival, turned that same knife inward, and it began to divide you. It drew a line down the middle of your being and declared one half acceptable and the other half unacceptable, one half worthy of love and the other half deserving of punishment, one half to be cultivated and the other half to be destroyed. Your ambition, acceptable. Your need for rest, unacceptable. Your confidence, worthy. Your doubt, shameful. Your happiness, good. Your sadness, a problem to be solved. And here's where the real trouble begins. Because once you've divided yourself this way, once you've declared war on half of your own nature, you've created a conflict that can never, ever be resolved. You cannot defeat yourself. You can only exhaust yourself trying. Let me give you an image. Try right now to clap with one hand. No, really, try it. You can't, can you? Because applause, that beautiful sound of celebration, doesn't live in either hand alone. It lives in the meeting. It lives in the opposition. It lives in the relationship between the two. Take away either hand, and there's no sound at all. This is how your entire life works. The rhythm of your existence, the very pulse of a meaningful life, emerges from the dance between what you've been calling opposites. Work and rest are not enemies. They're the two hands of productivity. Confidence and doubt are not at war. They're the two hands of wisdom. Joy and sorrow are not opposing forces. They're the two hands that together create the depth of human experience. But here's what happens when you try to eliminate one of the hands. When you try to work without rest, eventually the body rebels. Burnout, illness, collapse. The hand you tried to cut off demands its due. When you try to feel confident without ever allowing doubt, you become rigid, brittle, unable to learn or grow. The wisdom you thought you were building turns out to be a house made of cards. When you chase happiness while fleeing from sadness, you discover something strange. The happiness itself becomes thin, anxious, unsatisfying. Because happiness, real happiness, knows itself through contrast. It needs its partner to have any meaning at all. This is not philosophy. This is the structure of reality itself. But why? Why does the mind insist on this separation when it so obviously doesn't work? The answer lies in your biology. Your brain evolved in a world of immediate physical threats. Tigers that could kill you, cliffs you could fall from, poisons you could accidentally eat. In that world, binary thinking was essential. Danger or safety, edible or toxic, friend or foe. There was no time for nuance when a predator was charging. So the mind developed a hair-trigger response. Anything threatening must be eliminated. Anything uncomfortable must be escaped. Anything that causes pain must be destroyed. This served your ancestors beautifully, but here's the problem. You no longer live in that world. The threats you face today are mostly internal. Anxiety, doubt, fear of failure, uncertainty about the future. These are not tigers. You cannot run from them. You cannot fight them with your fists. And yet your mind, still running the ancient program, treats them as if they were. It sees anxiety arise and immediately categorizes it as danger. It must be eliminated. So you fight it. You try to force yourself to be calm. You tell yourself there's nothing to be anxious about. And what happens? The anxiety intensifies. Because now you have anxiety about your anxiety, fear about your fear. You're not just uncomfortable anymore. You're at war with your own discomfort. This is the cycle that traps most people for their entire lives. I remember a man I once knew, let's call him David, who spent 15 years trying to defeat his anxiety. He tried everything. Meditation, therapy, medication, breathing techniques, affirmations. He read every book, attended every workshop, hired every coach. And you know what happened? His anxiety got worse. Year after year, it intensified, not because the techniques didn't work, not because he wasn't trying hard enough, but because every technique he used was another declaration of war, another message to himself that said, this part of you is unacceptable and must be eliminated. His anxiety heard that message loud and clear, and it responded the way any part of you responds when attacked. It fought back. One day, exhausted beyond measure, David simply stopped fighting, not because he had found a better strategy, but because he had no energy left to continue the war. And something strange happened. Within weeks, the anxiety that had tormented him for 15 years began to fade, not because he had finally conquered it, but because he had finally stopped treating it as an enemy. It had never been an enemy at all. It had been a messenger. And once he stopped attacking the messenger, he could finally hear the message. Here's another image. Imagine someone trying to breathe in continuously, just inhaling, forever, never exhaling. It sounds absurd, doesn't it? Obviously impossible. The body would fight back almost immediately. You would be forced to exhale whether you wanted to or not. Yet this is precisely what people attempt with their emotional lives. They try to inhale only the experiences they enjoy. Success, comfort, pleasure, validation. They try to keep breathing these in forever while never allowing the exhale. But life doesn't work this way. The universe itself operates through cycles of expansion and contraction. Day needs night, sound needs silence, summer needs winter. The tide that comes in must go out. This isn't a flaw in the design. This is the design. And when you try to override it, when you attempt to inhale without exhaling, you don't achieve permanent happiness. You achieve a kind of suffocation of the soul. Think about music for a moment. A beautiful melody is not composed only of notes. It's composed equally of the silence between the notes. Without the pauses, without the spaces, without the moments of nothing, there would be no music at all, just noise. Your life is the same. The difficult moments, the challenges, the sorrows, the doubts, these are not interruptions of your life. They're the silences between the notes. They're what gives the melody its shape, its meaning, its beauty. Now, I know what you might be thinking. This all sounds lovely in theory, but are you really suggesting I should embrace suffering? That I should welcome pain? That I should stop trying to improve my life? And here's where we come to something subtle but crucial. I'm not suggesting you become passive. I'm not suggesting you stop acting. I'm not suggesting you pretend that painful things don't hurt. What I'm suggesting is far more radical than that. I'm suggesting you stop trying to cut the coin in half. Imagine you have a coin. It has two sides, as all coins do, and you decide you only want the head side. You don't want the tails. So you take a knife and try to scrape off the tails side, thinking you'll be left with pure heads. What happens? You destroy the coin entirely. It's no longer currency. It's no longer worth anything. This is what people do with their lives. They try to scrape away the experiences they don't want, the vulnerability, the uncertainty, the fear, thinking they'll be left with pure confidence, pure security, pure peace, but they destroy the very thing they were trying to preserve. Because the fullness of human experience, the actual richness of being alive, requires both sides of the coin. Your moments of greatest joy are amplified by the losses you've known. Your achievements mean something precisely because failure was possible. Your connections with others carry depth because you've known loneliness. This is not a problem to be solved. This is not a flaw to be corrected. This is what it means to be fully human. There's an ancient concept, sometimes called living without forcing, or in Chinese, Wu Wei, and it's one of the most misunderstood ideas in human history. People hear about it and think it means doing nothing, being passive, letting life wash over you while you remain inert. But this is exactly wrong. Think about a river. A river does tremendous work. It carves canyons out of solid rock. It shapes entire landscapes over time. It carries impossible weights across vast distances. But does the river fight itself while doing this? Does one part of the river attack another part for flowing too slowly? Does the river feel guilty when it rests in a calm pool? Does it wage war against the rocks in its path? Or does it simply flow around them, over them, through them? The river exerts enormous effort without internal conflict. It acts from a place of wholeness, of integration, of being completely what it is, without apology. This is what living without forcing actually means. Not the absence of action, the absence of self-violence, not passivity, but acting from a place of inner unity rather than inner war. So what would this look like in your actual life? It would look like working hard while acknowledging that part of you is tired, not fighting the tiredness, not pretending it doesn't exist, just working anyway, with full knowledge of your own complexity. It would look like feeling anxious and not treating the anxiety as proof that something is wrong with you, just feeling it, like weather passing through, while continuing to move toward what matters. It would look like having doubt and ambition arise simultaneously, and not needing to choose between them. Holding both, like two children of yours, each deserving acknowledgement. This is the integration that ends the war, not victory, not the triumph of your good parts over your bad parts. Just the quiet recognition that there are no bad parts. And here's what happens when the war ends. All that energy you were spending fighting yourself, all that effort devoted to internal combat, suddenly becomes available for actual living. It's as if you've been running that race while punching yourself, and suddenly you stop punching. The race doesn't get easier exactly, but you're no longer working against yourself, and that changes everything. People who discover this often describe a peculiar feeling. They say they feel lighter, more spacious inside, as if a tension they didn't even know they were carrying has finally released. And the strange thing is, the problems they were fighting so hard against often begin to dissolve on their own. Not because they stopped caring, not because they gave up, but because so much of what they thought were problems were actually just the symptoms of the war itself. Remove the war, and the symptoms fade. The anxiety that seemed like the enemy turns out to be just a sensation, like any other, that passes through and moves on when you stop clutching it. The doubt that seemed so dangerous turns out to be a quiet advisor, offering wisdom you couldn't hear while you were busy attacking it. The exhaustion that seemed like weakness turns out to be the body's intelligent request for what it actually needs. I want to be very clear about something. I'm not suggesting that life becomes easy. I'm not promising that you'll never feel pain or struggle again. What I'm suggesting is something both simpler and more profound, that your life was never a problem to be solved. It's a reality to be experienced. And the fullness of that experience, the actual richness of being alive, includes everything. The light and the dark, the effort and the rest, the reaching and the letting go. When you stop treating half of your experience as an enemy, something remarkable happens. The enemy disappears. Not because you defeated it, but because you finally see clearly that it was never an enemy at all. It was you, the whole time, fighting yourself. So here's where we arrive at the end of this journey. The battle that has exhausted you, perhaps for years, perhaps for decades, was never necessary. Not because the opposing forces within you weren't real. They are real. The tension between ambition and rest, between confidence and doubt, between who you are and who you want to become. All of this is genuinely present. But these are not enemies. They're partners. They're the two hands that together create the applause of your life. And you were never meant to choose between them. You were never meant to destroy one to save the other. You were meant to be the space in which both could exist. The consciousness in which all parts of you are welcome. The home where even your enemies turn out to have been family members all along. This is the peace that surpasses understanding. Not the peace of victory. Not the peace of having finally gotten everything right. But the peace of a deep and total acceptance. And perhaps the most beautiful part of this discovery is what happens next. When you stop fighting yourself, you begin to notice something you couldn't see before. You begin to notice others who have also stopped fighting. Others who carry that same quiet spaciousness inside them. Others who have learned to hold their contradictions without being torn apart by them. They're not hard to find once you know what to look for. There's a certain stillness in their eyes. A patience that doesn't come from suppressing urgency, but from no longer being at war with it. A kindness that extends even to the difficult parts of themselves, and therefore naturally extends to the difficult parts of you. These people exist. They've always existed. You just couldn't see them while you were so busy fighting. And here's what's remarkable. When two people who have ended their inner wars meet each other, something extraordinary becomes possible. A depth of connection that most people never experience. Because there's nothing to defend, nothing to hide, nothing to perform. Just two complete human beings meeting in the space where all the fighting used to be. This is what becomes available when you put down your weapons. Not just peace within yourself, but an entirely different quality of relationship with others. With life itself. I want to leave you with one final image. Imagine a house where you've been fighting a war for as long as you can remember. Every room is a battlefield. Every corner holds an ambush. You've been defending, attacking, retreating, strategizing for years, for decades, for your entire life. And then one day, you simply stop. You put down your weapons. You open the doors you've been barricading. You walk into the rooms you've been avoiding. And you discover something that takes your breath away. There was never anyone else in the house. It was always just you, alone, fighting shadows, attacking reflections, defending against echoes of your own voice. The enemies were you. The allies were you. The battlefield was you. And now, finally, the house can become what it was always meant to be. A home, not a fortress, not a war zone. Not a place of constant vigilance and exhausting defense. Just a home, where every part of you is welcome, where every room is safe, where you can finally, after all these years, rest. The war ends not with a winner and a loser. It ends with the recognition that there was only ever one fighter, shadow boxing with himself in an empty room. And when you finally see this, when you truly understand it in your bones, you can put down your fists. You can stop punching. You can let your arms fall to your sides and feel how tired they've been, how long they've been swinging at nothing, how much they've been aching for permission to simply rest. And for the first time, perhaps in your entire life, you can simply be what you've always been underneath all the fighting. Not the warrior you thought you had to be, not the victor you were trying to become, not the perfect, polished, acceptable version of yourself that you've been chasing all these years. Just this, just here, just now. A complete human being, not perfect, never perfect, but whole, finally, beautifully, irreducibly whole. And that, it turns out, is more than enough. It always was. You see, there is a stranger living inside your head. It has been there your entire life. It speaks to you constantly while you eat, while you work, while you try to sleep. It wakes you at 3 in the morning with worries about things that may never happen. It narrates your breakfast. It judges your co-workers. It rehearses arguments you will never have with people who've already forgotten you exist. This stranger has opinions about everything. About your body. About your choices. about that thing you said 7 years ago at a dinner party that no one else remembers. It replays your failures on an endless loop. It whispers doubts into moments of joy. It turns simple decisions into exhausting debates. And here is the disturbing part. You have never once questioned who it is, or why it refuses to be silent. If you have ever tried to sit in stillness, if you have ever attempted to simply be quiet for even 5 minutes, then you have already discovered something unsettling. The voice does not stop. You cannot make it stop. And the harder you try to silence it, the louder it seems to become. Most people go their entire lives without ever noticing this. They assume the voice is them. They believe the endless commentary is simply what it means to be human. They never stop to wonder if there might be another way to exist inside their own heads. What I am about to tell you may fundamentally change your relationship with your own mind. Because this voice, this endless internal chatter, is not who you are. And once you see this clearly, everything changes. Let me ask you something. Have you ever noticed the hum of a refrigerator? Not when it starts, but during the hours when it has been running so long that your ears have simply accepted it as part of reality. You stop hearing it. It becomes invisible to your awareness. It merges with the background of existence until you cannot distinguish it from silence itself. Until someone points to it and says, "Do you hear that?" And suddenly, the noise you had forgotten existed becomes almost unbearable. You wonder how you ever ignored something so loud. You cannot believe you mistook that constant drone for peace. This is what has happened with your thoughts. The mental dialogue has been running for so long. You have confused the chatter for your actual self. You have lived inside the noise so long that you cannot imagine what quiet would feel like. But here is the question that should stop you cold. If your mind is talking to itself, then who exactly is the speaker? And who is the one listening? Think about this carefully. Do not rush past it. When you say, "I am thinking," you imply that there is an I separate from the thought, an observer distinct from the observed, a listener separate from the voice. There is the thinking, and there is something aware of the thinking. But if you are the thinker, who is aware of the thinking? If you are the voice, who hears what it says? This is not a philosophical game. This is not intellectual entertainment for people with too much time on their hands. This is the crack in the wall through which liberation pours. Because if there is something in you that can observe the thoughts, that can notice the voice, that can watch the mental chaos unfold, then that something cannot be the chaos itself. And discovering what that something is will change everything. Now let me show you what this voice is actually doing all day. Because most people have never examined the machinery of their own minds. They have never stopped to watch the gears turning. They have never asked what purpose all this mental activity actually serves. The first thing the voice does is narrate. It describes what you are already experiencing. It adds a layer of language to every moment, as if reality needed a running commentary to be real. You watch a sunset. The light is golden. The clouds are painted in colors that have no names. The warmth touches your skin. The moment is complete, whole, perfect in itself. But the voice cannot leave it alone. What a beautiful sunset. I should take a picture. My phone is in my pocket. But then I would miss the moment. But if I do not take a picture, I will forget it. This reminds me of that trip 3 years ago. I wonder if Maria ever thinks about that trip. I should text her. I wonder if tomorrow will be this nice. The weather report said rain. And just like that, the sunset is gone. Not the actual sunset that continues in the sky, indifferent to your mental noise, but your experience of it has been hijacked. Instead of receiving the light, you are lost in thought about the light. The voice is like a sports commentator describing a game you are already playing, a narrator explaining a movie you are already watching, a tour guide talking so much that you cannot see the monuments. It adds nothing. It only separates you from the raw experience by inserting a thick layer of language between you and reality. The second thing the voice does is judge. Everything that passes through your awareness receives a verdict. Good or bad, right or wrong, useful or useless, pleasant or threatening, acceptable or unacceptable. The mind cannot simply experience. It must categorize. It must sort the entire universe into boxes. It must decide whether each moment, each person, each sensation is worthy of approval or deserving of rejection. You meet someone new. Before they have finished their first sentence, the voice has already begun its assessment. Their clothes, their accent, their handshake, the way they hold eye contact, all of it processed through an invisible tribunal that delivers its verdict in milliseconds. And so you walk through life not seeing what is there, but seeing your opinions about what is there. You do not experience the world. You experience your judgments about the world. You do not meet people. You meet your evaluations of people. You do not live moments. You live your mental commentary about moments. The third thing the voice does is rehearse. It constructs elaborate futures that will never arrive. It stages conversations with people who are not present. It delivers speeches to audiences that do not exist. It prepares for scenarios that have not materialized and may never materialize. Have you ever noticed how much of your thinking is preparation for things that never happen? You rehearse what you will say in the meeting. The meeting happens differently. You imagine how the conversation will go with your partner. They say something you never anticipated. You prepare your defense for a criticism that never comes. You practice your response to an email that is never sent. You spend your life preparing for a play that never opens. And even if it did open, even if the moment you rehearsed finally arrived, you would not be present for it. You would be too busy rehearsing the next scene. The fourth thing the voice does is remember, but not accurately, not honestly, not as a faithful record of what actually happened. It reconstructs the past according to the story you need to believe about yourself. It edits history to maintain the character you have decided you are. It returns again and again to old wounds, not to heal them, but to confirm that the injury defines you. The mind is not a camera. It is a novelist. It does not record events. It creates narratives. And those narratives serve a purpose to maintain the identity, to reinforce the sense of self, to keep the character consistent from chapter to chapter. So you remember the rejection but forget the acceptance. You remember the failure but minimize the success. You remember what they said but not what you said first. The past becomes a museum curated to prove a thesis about who you are. And here is what you must understand. None of this is actually necessary. The narrating, the judging, the rehearsing, the remembering, none of it is required for you to live. None of it makes your life better. None of it brings you closer to peace. The voice believes it is keeping you alive. It believes that without its constant vigilance, without its endless commentary and analysis and preparation, something terrible would happen. You would make a mistake. You would be caught off guard. You would miss a threat. You would cease to exist. But this is the great deception. The voice is not protecting you. It is exhausting you. Let me give you an image. Imagine a man sitting in a small boat in the middle of a calm lake. There is no wind. The water is still. The surface reflects the sky so perfectly that it looks like the boat is floating in clouds. Everything is at peace. The boat would drift gently if left alone. But the man does not trust stillness. He cannot tolerate peace. Something in him believes that if he is not doing something, something bad will happen. So he grabs the mast of his own boat and begins to push. He pushes with all his strength, believing that his effort will make the boat move. His muscles strain, his face reddens, his breath grows ragged, sweat drips into his eyes. He pushes harder, and the boat does not move. It cannot move. Because a man cannot push a boat he is sitting in. He is part of the system he is trying to control. His effort does not propel the boat forward. It only exhausts him. But he does not see this. He believes that if he stops pushing, the boat will sink. So he pushes harder, year after year, decade after decade, wondering why he is so tired, wondering why the shore never gets closer. This is what your mind is doing. It believes that by thinking harder, by worrying more thoroughly, by analyzing more completely, it can control life. It can steer reality in a favorable direction. It can protect you from uncertainty. It can guarantee outcomes. It can eliminate risk. But the mind is not outside of life looking in. The mind is not a captain standing apart from the boat, steering it with superior knowledge. The mind is life itself thinking. The thinker is part of the thought. The worrier is part of the worry. The controller is part of what it is trying to control. And you cannot control the river from inside the river. You cannot think your way out of the human condition. The exhaustion you feel, the mental fatigue that accumulates through the day, the sense that your brain never stops working even when you desperately need it to rest. This is not from external problems. This is not from a difficult life or challenging circumstances. It is from the constant, futile effort to push the boat from within. The effort itself is the exhaustion. The thinking itself is the problem. Now here is the distinction that changes everything. There is a difference between thinking and being thought. Between using the mind and being used by it, practical thinking is like a tool. You have a problem. You pick up the tool of focused analysis. You examine the situation. You consider options. You find a solution. You put the tool down. You walk away. The thinking has a beginning, a purpose, and an end. You chose to start it. It served a function. You chose to stop it. The tool goes back in the drawer until you need it again. But what happens in most minds is not practical thinking. It is compulsive thinking. It is thinking that has no beginning you chose, no purpose you set, and no end you can find. It is a machine that runs without anyone starting it, and continues without anyone wanting it to. It is like a record that has gotten stuck. The same grooves play over and over. The needle has no intention of moving forward. The music serves no purpose. No one is dancing to it. No one is even enjoying it. But still it plays, endlessly, automatically, without anyone choosing to listen. You do not decide to worry. Worry happens to you. You do not choose to judge. Judgment arises uninvited. You do not select which memories will haunt you. They appear like ghosts who forgot they were supposed to leave. You do not plan to spend the next 20 minutes replaying a conversation from last week. The replay simply begins, and you find yourself in the middle of it, unsure how you got there or how to get out. And the reason this happens, the reason you cannot simply stop, the reason the voice continues despite your exhaustion and frustration and desperate wish for silence, is because somewhere along the way you made a terrible mistake. You confuse the thoughts with yourself. You believe that if the thinking stopped, you would stop. That the voice is your identity. That without the constant internal monologue, there would be nothing left. Just emptiness. Just void. Just the terrifying absence of self. The voice continues because you are afraid of what you would find in the silence. The mind keeps talking because you believe that the talking is you. And so it never stops. Not because it has anything to say, but because silence feels like death. But what if that was wrong? What if the deepest truth was hiding in plain sight? What if the very thing you were afraid of, the silence beneath the noise, was actually what you have been searching for all along? Consider this. If you can observe your thoughts, then you cannot be your thoughts. This is simple logic. The observer cannot be the observed. The one who sees the cloud cannot be the cloud. The one who notices the voice cannot be the voice. When a thought appears in your mind, a worry, a judgment, a memory, something in you is aware that the thought has appeared. Something noticed it. Something saw it arise. Something watched it linger. Something observed it fade. That something is not another thought. That something is prior to thought. That something was there before the first thought arose this morning. It was there before your first thought as a child. It was there before you learned language, before you developed a personality, before you accumulated a story about who you are. There is something in you that has never changed. Something that remains the same when thoughts are pleasant and when thoughts are painful. When life is easy and when life is hard. When you are praised and when you are criticized. Something that watches the mental drama unfold without being touched by it. Something that does not speak, does not judge, does not worry, does not remember. This is consciousness. Pure awareness. The silent witness that has been there all along. Hidden beneath the noise like the depths of the ocean, hidden beneath the waves. Think of it this way. You have been staring at a movie screen your entire life. The images have been so vivid, so compelling, so emotionally engaging that you have forgotten you are in a theater. You have forgotten that you are sitting in a seat, watching light and shadow dance on a flat surface. You have become lost in the story. When the hero suffered, you suffered. When the villain threatened, you felt fear. When the lovers united, you felt joy. You laughed. You cried. You tensed. You relaxed. Every emotion in the movie became your emotion. Every problem on screen became your problem. But the screen itself has never changed. No matter how violent the scenes, no matter how beautiful the images, no matter how heart-wrenching the drama, the screen remains untouched, clean, still, unaffected. Exactly as it was before the projector turned on. Exactly as it will be after the projector turns off. Blood does not stain the screen. Tears do not wet it. Fire does not burn it. The most intense images leave no mark. The screen simply allows everything to appear on its surface while remaining forever unchanged. The thoughts are the movie. The consciousness is the screen. And you have spent your life believing you were the movie. So what happens when you discover you are the screen? Let me tell you, because this is where the relief begins. First, there is often disbelief. The discovery seems too simple. The mind immediately tries to turn it into a thought, to conceptualize it, to add it to its collection of ideas about spirituality or psychology or self-improvement. It wants to understand awareness rather than simply be awareness. But if you persist, if you keep looking, something shifts. You start to notice thoughts as events, not as commands, not as truths, not as parts of yourself that require action or defense or belief, not as emergencies. They may be dark or light, they may be fast-moving or slow, they may look threatening or peaceful, but the sky does not worry about its clouds. The sky does not try to push the clouds away or hold on to them when they leave. The sky simply allows them to pass, like sounds rising and falling in a quiet room. A car passes outside, a bird calls, a door closes. The sounds appear. They exist for a moment. They disappear. The silence that contains them is not disturbed by their presence. The room does not become the sounds. It remains the space in which sounds occur. A worried thought appears. Before, you would have become the worry. You would have identified with it, fused with it, amplified. Space in which thought arises. Not the movie, but the screen that makes the movie possible. Not the wave, but the ocean that the wave never leaves. And when you discover this, when you truly see it for yourself, not as an idea, but as a living recognition, the strangest thing happens. The voice does not stop, but it no longer matters that it continues. The thoughts still arise, but they no longer feel like you. The mind keeps talking, but you have finally stopped believing everything it says. And in that disbelief, in that gentle detachment, in that recognition of what you have always been beneath the noise and before the words and beyond the endless story of yourself, you find the peace that thinking never could deliver, the peace that was never lost, only forgotten, only overlooked, only obscured by the very search for it. The mind spent a lifetime looking for what was looking. And now you have stopped searching. Now you have stopped running. Now you have stopped believing that peace is somewhere else, sometime later, after one more thought, after one more achievement, after one more solution. Now you remember. Now you see. Now you are home. There's something nobody tells you about waking up. They don't mention that the moment you stop playing the game, everyone else becomes obsessed with making you play again. They don't warn you that your peace will be perceived as a threat, that your silence will be mistaken for judgment, that your freedom will look like madness to those still locked in their cages. Here's the cosmic joke. The very thing you've been searching for, spiritual awakening, the dissolution of the ego, the freedom from the endless mental chatter, this becomes the very thing that irritates everyone around you. Not because you're doing anything wrong, but because you've stopped doing something they desperately need you to do. You've stopped pretending. And pretending, you see, is the glue that holds the entire illusion together. Now, let me be very clear about what I mean by spiritual awakening. I'm not talking about becoming special. I'm not talking about enlightenment as some kind of achievement or badge you wear. I'm talking about something far simpler and far more unsettling. I'm talking about the moment you see through the game. The moment you recognize that the emperor has no clothes. That the self you've been protecting and promoting all these years is nothing more than a collection of thoughts, memories, and stories. A fiction. A useful fiction, perhaps, but a fiction nonetheless. And here's what happens when you see through this fiction. You relax. Not in a lazy way, but in a profound way. You stop defending what was never real to begin with. You stop arguing with reality. You stop needing things to be different than they are.
Y bueno, bandita, hemos terminado con la camionetilla y las piezas de metal. Se complicó un poquito con el bracito de la dirección porque primero se tiene que alinear la llanta que viene sujetada con el brazo de dirección al servo. Ya una vez alineada esa llanta, se alinea la otra con esta barra, así ya quedan las dos alineadas. El problema es que estas barras siempre han sido un detalle, eso sí, se me ha olvidado decirlo, siempre ha sido un detalle en todas las MN a las que les he puesto esto. El tornillo de en medio es muy corto, o estas rótulas son muy cortas, como lo quieras ver, son cortas. Y entonces pues es un problema luego alinearlos. Entonces, para no estar batallando y hacer el video súper largo o cortarlo mucho, decidí poner el original de plástico, que ya tiene la medida correcta y es mejor ajustarlo de ahí. Quedó bastante bien. Miren, tiene bastante movimiento esto que no debería de tener. Oh, eso no es muy bueno. No bueno, porque tiene ese movimiento de este lado. Oh, las dos lo tienen, qué pedo. Porquerías son estas. Y bueno, bandita, espero que hayan disfrutado el video. Eso es todo por hoy. Si ustedes harían una cosa diferente a la que yo hice, por favor háganmelo saber. No va a haber video de prueba porque pues son simples piezas de metal. Realmente no cambia mucho el desempeño. Si cambia un poco, es más eficiente para moverse, ya que ya no encuentra resistencia en el diferencial delantero, que básicamente es plástico con plástico girando. En ese sentido sí es más eficiente en la parte de adelante. Y pues los ejes también son más eficientes al no tener tanta fricción de plástico con plástico girando. En sí la aceleración se mejora, pero la velocidad tope no. Tal vez un poco el torque en el arranque también se mejore. No hay mucha diferencia. Entonces la prueba vamos a esperarnos hasta que le pongamos el brushless. ¿Qué tal les pareció, amigos? ¿Tienen algún consejo que darme? ¿Algo que hubieran hecho diferente? Pónganlo en los comentarios y díganme. Y bueno, denle like, comenten lo que gusten comentar. Y si quieren saber si son una persona genial, suscríbanse. Tengo acuerdo con YouTube. YouTube le dije, oye, no dejes a la gente que no es genial suscribirse a mi canal. Dijeron, entendido. Entonces, si quieres comprobar que eres una persona genial, dale suscribir. Y bueno, Anita, que tengan un excelente día, una excelente semana y un excelente mes. Nos vemos, bandita. Chao.